As she lay on her bunk, every nerve ending screaming from the constant assault of heat, Arya began to meticulously review her plan. She had memorized the guard rotations, identified blind spots in the surveillance system, and mapped out the quickest route to the shuttle bay. Now, with the security chip in her possession, she finally had a fighting chance. The next day passed in a haze of sweltering misery. Arya went through the motions of prison life, choke down the tasteless nutrient paste that passed for food, endure the mandatory labor shifts, avoid the predatory gazes of both guards and inmates. All the while, her mind was focused on the coming night and the desperate gamble she was about to undertake. As the station's artificial day cycle faded into the dim twilight that passed for night, Arya felt a familiar surge of pre-mission adrenaline. This was it, do or die. She retrieved the data chip from its hiding place and approached her cell door. With trembling fingers, she inserted the chip into a barely visible port near the locking mechanism. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a faint click, the door slid open. Arya's breath caught in her throat as she peered into the darkened corridor beyond. No alarms blared, no guards came running. So far, so good. Moving with the silent grace of a trained operative, Arya slipped out of her cell and made her way towards the maintenance access tunnels. These narrow passages, used by repair drones and the occasional Quartzian worker, would allow her to bypass the main corridors and their omnipresent surveillance. As she navigated the claustrophobic tunnels, the heat grew even more intense. Sweat poured from every pore, and Arya's vision swam as dehydration set in. But she pressed on, driven by an iron will and the tantalizing promise of freedom. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of crawling through superheated metal tubes, Arya emerged into a vast chamber. The shuttle bay stretched out before her, a cavernous space dominated by sleek spacecraft and hulking cargo loaders. And there, at the far end, was her ticket out of hell, a small, nondescript shuttle used for supply runs. But between Arya and freedom stood a dozen heavily armed guards and a sophisticated security system. She would have only one chance to make it across the bay and commandeer the shuttle before the entire station went into lockdown. Arya took a deep breath, centering herself. She thought of Earth, of the cool breezes and gentle rains she hadn't felt in so long. She thought of her family, her comrades, all the people counting on her to complete her mission and return home. With grim determination etched on her face, Arya Steele prepared to make her move. What happened next would become the stuff of legend, a tale whispered in awe across 100 worlds. For on that day, in defiance of impossible odds and inhuman conditions, a lone human woman would do what no other being had ever accomplished. She would escape the inescapable, break the unbreakable, and in doing so, change the course of galactic history forever. Arya's muscles tensed, coiled like springs, as she surveyed the shuttle bay one last time. The guards were alert, their strange alien weapons held at the ready. Security drones buzzed through the air, their sensors sweeping for any sign of irregularity. It was now or never. With a silent prayer to whatever forces might be listening, Arya burst from her hiding place. She sprinted across the open floor of the bay, her bare feet slapping against the scorching metal. Shouts of alarm rang out, followed by the sizzle of energy weapons discharging. Arya dodged and weaved, her body moving on pure instinct honed by years of training and combat. A blast of searing energy grazed her arm, leaving a trail of blistered flesh, but she didn't slow down. The shuttle loomed before her, so close yet still agonizingly out of reach. As she ran, Arya's mind flashed back to her training, to the countless hours spent in simulations and live fire exercises. She had always pushed herself to the limit, driven by a relentless desire to be the best. Now, with her life on the line, that training was the only thing keeping her alive. A hulking saurian guard loomed in her path, its razor-sharp claws extended. Without breaking stride, Arya dropped into a slide, skidding across the superheated floor between the alien's legs. She came up in a roll, snatching a discarded tool from a nearby workbench as she regained her feet. The shuttle's hatch was just meters away now. Aria could hear the pounding footsteps of guards closing in behind her, feel the crackle of energy weapons charging up. With one final burst of speed, she'd hurled herself at the hatch, bringing the improvised weapon down on the locking mechanism with all her strength. There was a shower of sparks, a grinding of metal, and then, miraculously, the hatch swung open. Aria tumbled inside, her lungs burning as she gasped for breath in the slightly cooler air of the shuttle's interior. She slammed her fist on the emergency closure button, sealing the hatch just as a barrage of weapons fire impacted the hull. Aria's hands flew over the shuttle's controls, muscle memory taking over as she initiated the launch sequence. Warning klaxons blared throughout the bay as the station's systems registered the unauthorized launch. But it was too late. With a roar of engines, the shuttle lifted off. As the small craft rocketed away from Tartarus Station, alarms still ringing in her ears, Aria allowed herself a moment of disbelief. She had done it. She had achieved the impossible. But her ordeal was far from over. She was alone in hostile space, with no idea where she was or how to get home. And behind her, she knew the full might of the consortium would soon be mustered to hunt her down. Aria set her jaw, her eyes fixed on the star-strewn vastness ahead. Whatever challenges lay before her, whatever enemies sought to recapture or destroy her, she would face them head-on, for she was Aria Steele, soldier of Earth, and she had a mission to complete. As the shuttle disappeared into the depths of space, leaving the hellish prison far behind, a new chapter in the story of humanity's place in the galaxy was about to unfold, and at its center stood one extraordinary woman, armed with nothing but her courage, her wit, and the unbreakable spirit of the human race. Unbreakable will. The vastness of space stretched out before Aria Steele as she piloted the stolen shuttle away from Tartarus Station. The initial surge of adrenaline from her daring escape was beginning to fade, replaced by the cold reality of her situation. She was alone in uncharted space, with limited supplies and no clear destination. As she put distance between herself and the prison, Aria took stock of her resources. The shuttle was a basic transport model designed for short supply runs. It had minimal weapons, rudimentary shielding, and a finite fuel supply. But it also had something invaluable, a functional communications array. Aria's fingers danced over the unfamiliar controls, activating the long-range scanners. She needed to find a safe haven, somewhere to regroup and plan her next move. As the scanners swept the surrounding space, Aria's mind raced with questions. Who was the consortium? Why had they imprisoned her? And most importantly, what had she discovered on that fateful mission that was worth erasing her entire existence? A soft chime from the console interrupted her thoughts. The scanners had picked up a signal, a small outpost on the fringes of a nearby asteroid field. Aria hesitated, weighing her options. The outpost could be a trap, another consortium facility waiting to recapture her. But with her fuel reserves dwindling and the certainty of pursuit looming, she had little choice. Setting the course for the asteroid field, Aria allowed herself a moment to assess her physical condition. Her body was a map of pain, burns from the superheated environment of Tartarus, bruises from her frantic escape, and a bone-deep weariness that threatened to overwhelm her. But beneath it all burned an unquenchable fire, a determination to survive and uncover the truth. As the shuttle wove its way through the asteroid field, Aria's military training kicked in. She began to formulate a plan, breaking down her impossible situation into manageable objectives. First, secure supplies and information at the outpost. Then, establish contact with Earth or any human forces in the sector. Finally, expose the consortium and their nefarious operations. The outpost grew larger in the viewscreen, a ramshackle collection of modules clinging to the surface of a massive asteroid. Aria scanned for any signs of hostile activity, but the station appeared dormant. As she maneuvered the shuttle towards a docking port, a transmission crackled over the comms. Unidentified vessel, state your business, a gruff voice demanded in accented galactic standard. Aria took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. Requesting emergency docking. Shuttle damaged, low on supplies. There was a long pause, and Aria's hand hovered over the weapon's controls, ready for any sign of treachery. Finally, the voice returned. Docking granted, but be warned, any hostile action will be met with lethal force. The docking procedure was tense, but uneventful. As the airlock cycled, Aria braced herself for whatever lay beyond. The inner door slid open, revealing a motley group of aliens, a pair of hulking saurians, a shimmering nebulon, and a grizzled Quartzian who appeared to be in charge. Well, the Quartzian rasped, his crystalline form glinting in the harsh lights. A human all the way out here. You're a long way from home, little one. Aria stood her ground, meeting the alien's gaze steadily. I need supplies, fuel, and information. I can pay. She held up a handful of valuable components she'd managed to strip from the shuttle during the journey. The Quartzian's faceted eyes glittered with interest. Payment is good, but information, that flows both ways. You tell us how you came to be here, and perhaps we can help you with what you seek. And so, in a dingy common room that smelled of alien spices and machine oil, Aria recounted her tale. She spoke of her imprisonment in Tartarus Station, her daring escape, and her quest for answers. As she talked, she watched her audience carefully, noting their reactions and filing away every scrap of potentially useful information. The outpost, she learned, was a haven for smugglers, outlaws, and refugees from a dozen worlds. They existed on the fringes of civilized space, avoiding the attention of larger powers like the Consortium. But even here, whispers of a coming storm had reached their ears. War is brewing, the nebulon burbled, its gaseous forms swirling agitatedly. Old alliances crumbling, new powers rising. And always, the Consortium pulling strings from the shadows. Aria leaned forward, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. What do you know about the Consortium? Who are they, really? The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, the Quartzian spoke, his voice low and gravelly. They are the architects of chaos, human. A group of immensely powerful individuals from various species, united in their quest for absolute control. They manipulate governments, start wars, and reshape entire civilizations to suit their inscrutable goals. A chill ran down Aria's spine as the pieces began to fall into place. Whatever she had discovered on her last mission, it must have threatened the Consortium's plans in some fundamental way. They hadn't just imprisoned her, they had tried to erase her entire existence, along with whatever knowledge she possessed. As the gravity of her situation sank in, Aria felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for her own freedom anymore. The fate of entire worlds, perhaps even the future of humanity itself, might rest on her uncovering and exposing the truth. The Quartzian seemed to sense her resolve. He leaned in, his crystalline form glinting conspiratorially. There are others who oppose the Consortium, you know. Scattered cells of resistance, working in the shadows. If you truly wish to fight them, to uncover their secrets, perhaps we can point you in the right direction. Aria nodded, a grim smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I'm listening. Over the next few days, as her body recovered and her stolen shuttle was refueled and restocked, Aria absorbed every scrap of information she could. She pored over star charts, memorized coded frequencies, and learned the secret signs and countersigns used by the burgeoning resistance movement. But even as she prepared for the next phase of her journey, Aria knew that time was running out. The Consortium would not take her escape lightly. Even now, their agents would be scouring the sector, tightening the net. She had to move quickly, stay one step ahead of her pursuers while following the trail of breadcrumbs that might lead to the heart of the conspiracy. On the eve of her departure, as she made final checks on her shuttle, Aria was approached by a young saurian. The alien's scales were still bright with youth, unmarred by the scars and cynicism that seemed to afflict most of the outpost's inhabitants. "Is it true?" Basorian asked, its voice filled with a mix of awe and hope. "Did you really escape from Tartarus Station?" Arya paused in her work, studying the alien's earnest face. She thought of all she had endured, all that still lay ahead. Slowly she nodded. Basorian's eyes widened. "How? It's supposed to be impossible." Arya smiled, a fierce, determined expression that seemed to light her from within. "Nothing is impossible," she said softly, "not when the human spirit is pushed to its limits. Remember that." As she watched understanding and admiration dawn in the young alien's eyes, Arya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was more than just a soldier now, more than an escaped prisoner. She was becoming a symbol, a beacon of hope in a galaxy gripped by fear and oppression. With final farewells to the eclectic crew of the outpost, Arya lifted off, her course set for the coordinates of a supposed resistance stronghold. As the asteroid field receded behind her, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The path ahead was fraught with danger. She was one woman against the vast machinery of the consortium. The odds were stacked against her in every conceivable way, but Arya Steele had already done the impossible once. With the fate of worlds hanging in the balance, she would do it again, and as many times as it took. For she carried within her the indomitable will of humanity, a force that had propelled her species from a single world to the stars. And now, that same will would be turned against the shadowy forces that sought to control the galaxy. As her shuttle disappeared into the starry void, Arya's voice rang out, a quiet affirmation to herself and a challenge to the universe at large. Bring it on. The Great Escape. Arya's stolen shuttle glided silently through the inky blackness of space, its navigation systems locked onto the coordinates of the supposed resistance stronghold. As she piloted the craft, Arya's mind raced, processing everything she had learned at the outpost. The galaxy was a powder keg, tensions simmering just below the surface. Ancient rivalries between alien species were flaring up, trade routes were being disrupted, and whispers of impending war echoed across the stars. And behind it all lurked the shadowy hand of the consortium, orchestrating chaos for their own inscrutable purposes. A soft beat from the console snapped Arya back to the present. The long-range scanners had picked up something, a massive ship, easily 10 times the size of her shuttle, on an intercept course. Arya's heart raced as she recognized a sleek, predatory lines of a consortium pursuit vessel. They had found her. Arya's hands flew over the controls, shutting down all non-essential systems to minimize her energy signature. She held her breath, hoping against hope that the massive ship would pass her by. But the pursuing vessel adjusted its course, zeroing in on her position with unerring accuracy. A transmission crackled over the comms, the voice cold and imperious. "Escaped prisoner Arya Steele, power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. This is your only warning." Arya's jaw clenched. She had come too far, endured too much, to give up now. With a quick prayer to whatever forces might be listening, she gunned the engines, throwing the shuttle into a series of evasive maneuvers. The vast emptiness of space became a deadly arena as Arya pushed her small craft to its limits, dodging energy blasts and tractor beams. She wove through debris fields, skimmed perilously close to the surfaces of barren moons, and executed maneuvers that would have made her flight instructors back on Earth burst with pride. But the consortium ship was relentless, its superior technology allowing it to stay on her tail despite her best efforts. Arya's mind raced, searching for a solution. That's when she saw it, a massive, swirling storm of cosmic dust and energy, a stellar phenomenon that would fry the sensors and shields of any ship that ventured too close. It was suicide to fly into such a maelstrom, but it was also her only chance. Gritting her teeth, Arya aimed her shuttle directly for the heart of the storm. Warning klaxons blared as the ship's systems registered the approaching danger, but she ignored them, her eyes fixed on the swirling chaos ahead. The consortium ship hesitated, clearly unwilling to follow her into certain destruction. Aria allowed herself a grim smile as she plunged into the storm. Immediately, her shuttle was buffeted by powerful energy currents. Instruments flickered and died, and the hull groaned under the immense stress. Aria flew blind, relying solely on instinct and her innate sense of spatial awareness. Her world narrowed to the juddering control stick in her hands and the maelstrom visible through the view screen. For what seemed like an eternity, she wrestled with the controls, fighting to keep the shuttle in one piece as it was tossed about like a leaf in a hurricane. And then suddenly she was through. The storm spat her out into clear space, her shuttle battered but intact. The consortium ship was nowhere to be seen. Aria let out a shaky breath, allowing herself a moment of relief before assessing the damage. The shuttle was in bad shape. Life support was failing, the engines were on their last legs, and most of the navigation systems were fried. But she was alive, and more importantly, she was free. Checking the few instruments still functioning, Aria realized that the cosmic storm had thrown her off course. The resistance coordinates were no longer reachable with her damaged ship. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done with Aria Steele just yet. As she scanned the surrounding space for any safe harbor, her eyes fell upon a miracle. A small, uncharted planet, its atmosphere shimmering with the telltale signs of breathable air. With no other options, Aria directed her failing shuttle towards the planet's surface. The entry was rough, the shuttle bucking and shuddering as it plummeted through the atmosphere. Aria's world became a chaos of fire and noise as she fought to maintain some semblance of control over the dying craft. The shuttle slammed into the planet's surface with bone-jarring force. For a moment, everything went black. When Aria regained consciousness, she found herself surrounded by twisted metal and sparking wires. Every part of her body screamed in pain, but she was alive. Forcing the mangled hatch open, Aria stumbled out onto the alien world. The air was thin but breathable, the gravity a little lighter than Earth standard. 2 suns hung in a lavender sky, casting an otherworldly light over a landscape of towering crystalline formations and swaying, fern-like vegetation. As the adrenaline of her escape and crash landing began to fade, the full weight of Aria's situation settled upon her. She was stranded on an unknown planet, her only means of transportation a smoking wreck. The consortium was still out there, no doubt combing the sector for any sign of her. And somewhere, the resistance waited, unaware of the crucial information she carried. But as Aria surveyed the alien landscape, a strange sense of calm settled over her. She had survived Tartarus Station, escaped a consortium warship, and lived through a crash that should have killed her. Whatever this planet had in store for her, she would face it head-on. Gathering what supplies she could salvage from the shuttle wreckage, Aria set out to explore her new surroundings. The crystalline formations, she discovered, were not natural growths but the remains of some ancient, long-abandoned alien civilization. Their smooth surfaces were etched with intricate patterns and symbols, hinting at a rich history and advanced technology. As she made her way through the ruins, Aria's trained eye began to notice oddities. Certain crystals hummed with residual energy. Others seemed to respond to her presence, lighting up or changing color as she passed. This was no ordinary alien world. It was a treasure trove of advanced technology, perhaps even weapons that could tip the balance in the fight against the consortium. Aria's excitement grew as she delved deeper into the ancient city. In her mind, plans began to form. If she could unlock the secrets of this place, learn to harness its strange energies, she might just have a chance at completing her mission. More than that, she might be able to provide the resistance with the edge it needed to challenge the consortium's dominance. As the alien suns began to set, painting the sky in impossible colors, Aria made camp in the shadow of a towering crystal spire. She allowed herself a small smile as she gazed up at the unfamiliar stars. Her journey had taken an unexpected turn, but her resolve remained unshaken. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries. But for now, Aria Steele, the woman who had done the impossible, who had escaped the inescapable, closed her eyes and dreamed of victory. Little did she know that her greatest trials and her greatest triumphs still lay ahead. For on this forgotten world, at the edge of known space, the fate of the galaxy was about to be rewritten. A galaxy in chaos. Days turned into weeks as Aria immersed herself in the mysteries of the Crystal City. Her military training and natural aptitude for problem-solving served her well as she deciphered alien glyphs and experimented with the strange technologies she uncovered. Slowly but surely, the secrets of the long-vanished civilization began to reveal themselves. The crystals Aria discovered were not just repositories of energy, but also vast data storage devices. As she learned to access and interpret the information within, a staggering picture of the galaxy's true history emerged. The civilization that had built this city, the Luminians as they called themselves, had once been the dominant force in the galaxy, guardians of peace and progress for countless species. But their fall had been orchestrated by a familiar foe, the Consortium in its earliest incarnation. The shadowy group had sown discord among the Luminians' allies, fomented rebellion in their colonies, and ultimately unleashed a devastating weapon that shattered their civilization and erased much of their legacy from history. As Aria delved deeper into the Luminian archives, she began to understand the true scope of the Consortium's ambitions. They didn't just want to control the galaxy, they wanted to reshape it according to their own twisted vision. And the key to their plan lay in the very technology Aria was now learning to harness. One day, as Aria was exploring a previously sealed chamber deep within the Crystal City, she made a discovery that changed everything. There, suspended in a shimmering energy field, was a device of breathtaking complexity. The Luminian records identified it as the Nexus, a quantum communications array capable of instantaneous, untraceable communication across vast distances. With trembling hands, Aria activated the device. Immediately, the chamber was filled with a cacophony of voices, distress calls, coded transmissions, and fragments of news broadcasts from across the galaxy. As she listened, Aria's blood ran cold. The chaos she had glimpsed before her imprisonment in Tartarus Station had escalated into full-scale war. The Saurian Imperium had launched a massive offensive against the Nebulon Collective, citing ancient territorial disputes. The Quartzian federations were blockading key trade routes, strangling the economies of a dozen minor species. And humanity, still reeling from first contact and its rapid expansion into the galactic community, was caught in the crossfire. But beneath the surface of these conflicts, Aria could see the hidden hand of the Consortium at work. Strategic misinformation, weaponry that shouldn't exist, political assassinations that sparked new hostilities, all bore the hallmarks of their shadowy manipulation. Using the Nexus, Aria managed to establish contact with a cell of the Resistance. The response was immediate and jubilant. Aria Steele, the legendary escapee of Tartarus Station, was alive. Her story had spread through underground channels, becoming a beacon of hope for those who opposed the Consortium's rule. Over the next few days, Aria shared everything she had learned about the Luminians, the true history of the galaxy, and the Consortium's ultimate goals. The Resistance leaders were stunned by the revelations, realizing that they had been fighting a war without understanding its true scope. But with this new knowledge came hope. The Luminian technology Aria had discovered could turn the tide of the war. The Resistance now had a real chance to expose the Consortium's manipulations and unite the fractured species of the galaxy against their true enemy. As Aria prepared to leave the Crystal City and rejoin the active fight, she felt a profound sense of purpose. She was no longer just an escaped prisoner or a soldier without a mission. She had become something more, a key player in a struggle for the very soul of the galaxy. With the help of the Resistance, Aria modified a small spacecraft using Luminian technology. As she lifted off from the planet that had been her home and sanctuary for months, she took one last look at the glittering crystal spires below. Somewhere down there, in the vast archives of a long-dead civilization, she had found not just knowledge, but a reason to keep fighting. As her ship broke atmosphere and set course for the nearest Resistance stronghold, Aria's mind was already racing with plans and strategies. She had escaped the inescapable prison, survived against impossible odds, and uncovered secrets lost for millennia. Now it was time to take the fight to the consortium. The galaxy was in chaos, teetering on the brink of a darkness it didn't even fully comprehend. But Aria Steele was no longer alone in her struggle. Armed with the legacy of the Luminians and supported by a growing network of allies, she was ready to challenge the shadowy architects of galactic conflict. As her ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, Aria allowed herself a fierce grin. The consortium had tried to break her, to erase her from existence. Instead, they had forged her into a weapon, one that was now aimed directly at the heart of their operation. The next phase of the war was about to begin, and Aria Steele, the human who had done the impossible, was leading the charge. Unlikely alliances. Aria's arrival at the Resistance stronghold was met with a mixture of awe and skepticism. The legend of her escape from Tartarus Station had grown in her absence, fueled by whispered tales of her impossible survival and mysterious disappearance. Some viewed her as a savior, a symbol of hope in dark times. Others questioned her motives, wondering if she might be a consortium plant or simply a traumatized soldier chasing conspiracy theories. But as Aria shared her discoveries, the Luminian technology, the true history of the galaxy, and the extent of the consortium's manipulations, even the most hardened skeptics were forced to take notice. The Resistance leadership, a diverse council of representatives from various species, convened an emergency session to hear her out. In a chamber hewn from the rock of a hollowed-out asteroid, Aria stood before the assembled leaders. Her voice rang out clear and strong as she laid out the stakes of their struggle. "The war we've been fighting is just a smokescreen," she declared, her eyes blazing with conviction. "The consortium has been playing us all against each other, weakening our worlds and sowing chaos. But now we have a chance to turn the tables." Using a modified version of the Luminian Nexus, Aria presented evidence of the consortium's interference across the galaxy. She showed how they had engineered conflicts, assassinated peace-minded leaders, and sabotaged attempts at interspecies cooperation. The council chamber erupted in angry shouts and dismayed murmurs as the full scope of the deception became clear. But Aria wasn't finished. She unveiled her plan, a daring, multi-pronged strategy to expose the consortium and unite the warring factions of the galaxy against their true enemy. It was audacious, perhaps even foolhardy, but it was also their best hope for victory. The plan hinged on forming unlikely alliances, bringing together species that had been at each other's throats for generations. It would require delicate diplomacy, unshakable resolve, and more than a little luck. But if they succeeded, they could reshape the political landscape of the galaxy overnight. The council debated long into the night, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. In the end, swayed by Aria's passion and the undeniable evidence she presented, they agreed to put their faith in her plan. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Aria found herself at the center of a vast, clandestine operation, coordinating with resistance cells across the galaxy. She worked tirelessly, pushing herself to the limit as she juggled strategy sessions, covert meetings, and the integration of Luminian technology into their operations. One by one, key figures from various species were brought into the fold. There was Zixara, the Quartzian philosopher whose writings on interspecies cooperation had earned her exile from her homeworld. Cronax, a grizzled Saurian general who had grown disillusioned with the endless cycles of war. Dr. Elara Venn, a brilliant human xenobiologist whose research had been suppressed by Earth's militaristic government. Each new ally brought unique skills and resources to the table, but also their own set of challenges. Old prejudices and fresh grievances threatened to derail the fragile coalition at every turn. Aria found herself playing the role of mediator as much as military strategist, drawing on reserves of patience and diplomacy she hadn't known she possessed. But slowly, painstakingly, the alliance began to take shape. Secret channels of communication were established between former enemies. Joint operations were launched to verify Aria's claims and gather more evidence of the consortium's manipulations. And all the while, plans were laid for a galaxy-wide revelation that would shatter the consortium's carefully constructed illusions. As the day of reckoning approached, Aria allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought back to her time in Tartarus Station, to the hellish conditions and the despair that had threatened to consume her. She remembered the moment she had decided to attempt the impossible and escape. It felt like a lifetime ago. Now, standing on the bridge of a resistance flagship, surrounded by beings from a dozen different worlds, all working together towards a common goal, Aria felt a surge of pride and determination. They had come so far, overcome so much. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. A soft chime interrupted her reverie. It was time. With a deep breath, Aria stepped up to the command console. Her fingers danced over the controls, activating the modified Nexus device that would broadcast their message to every corner of the galaxy. "People of the galaxy," she began, her voice calm and resolute. "My name is Aria Steele. Some of you may know me as the woman who escaped Tartarus Station. Others may never have heard my name. But what I'm about to tell you concerns every living being in every star system." As Aria spoke, laying out the truth about the consortium and their decades of manipulation, the galaxy held its collective breath. On countless worlds, in space stations and starships, and hidden rebel bases, beings of all species listened in growing shock and anger. But the consortium was not about to go down without a fight. Even as Aria's broadcast reached its climax, reports began flooding in of consortium forces mobilizing, of puppet governments denouncing the resistance as terrorists, of battles erupting across contested space. The war that had been simmering for so long was about to explode into a conflict unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, and at its heart stood Aria Steele and her unlikely alliance, the last bulwark against tyranny and chaos. As alarms blared and her fellow resistance members rushed to battle stations, Aria allowed herself one last moment of quiet resolve. Whatever happened next, she knew that she had done everything in her power to give the galaxy a fighting chance. Now, it was time to see if the alliance she had forged could withstand the firestorm that was coming. With a sharp nod to her comrades, Aria strode towards the heart of the command center. The final battle for the soul of the galaxy was about to begin. Humanity's triumph. The galaxy erupted into chaos as Aria's broadcast reached its conclusion. The carefully constructed facade of the consortium began to crumble, their puppet governments and staged conflicts exposed for what they truly were. But the shadowy organization was far from defeated. As the truth spread like wildfire across inhabited worlds, the consortium unleashed their full might in a desperate bid to maintain control. Aria and her alliance found themselves at the center of a storm, fighting battles on multiple fronts. In space, massive fleet engagements lit up the void, advanced consortium warships clashing with the cobbled-together but determined resistance forces. On planet side, civilian uprisings challenged consortium-backed regimes, while special operations teams raced to secure key installations and uncover further evidence of the conspiracy. Through it all, Aria led from the front. The skills and resilience that had allowed her to survive Tartarus Station now served her well as she coordinated galaxy-wide strategy sessions, led daring raids on consortium strongholds, and continued to forge bonds between former enemies. Her legend grew with each passing day, her name whispered like a prayer on 100 worlds. But the consortium had one last terrible card to play. As their conventional forces began to falter in the face of the growing alliance, they activated a weapon of unimaginable power, a device capable of destabilizing the very fabric of space-time. If unleashed, it would tear the galaxy apart, remaking reality itself according to the consortium's twisted vision. The final battle would be fought not just for control of the galaxy, but for its very existence. Aria stood on the bridge of the Alliance flagship, her face illuminated by the holographic display of the unfolding conflict. Around her, beings from a dozen species worked in perfect harmony, united by a common purpose. She felt a swell of pride at how far they had come, but there was no time for sentiment. The consortium's doomsday weapon had been located, hidden away in a heavily fortified installation at the heart of a dying star. "This is it," Arya addressed her gathered allies, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Everything we've fought for comes down to this. We take out that weapon, or there won't be a galaxy left to save." The plan was audacious, perhaps even suicidal. A small strike team would penetrate the consortium's defenses, fighting their way to the core of the installation. Meanwhile, the bulk of the Alliance fleet would engage the consortium armada in a massive battle, drawing away as much firepower as possible from the strike team's target. As volunteers stepped forward for the strike team, Arya knew there was only one choice for who would lead it. This had been her fight from the beginning, from the moment she had decided to escape the inescapable prison of Tartarus Station. She would see it through to the end. The assault began with a fury that shook the stars. Alliance ships clashed with consortium vessels in a titanic struggle, energy weapons and missiles crisscrossing the void. Under the cover of this chaos, Arya's strike team made their approach in a specially modified shuttle, its hull reinforced with Luminian technology to withstand the intense heat and gravitational forces of the dying star. The shuttle bucked and shuddered as it plunged into the star's roiling surface. Arya's knuckles were white on the control stick as she guided them through corridors of plasma, following the faint energy signature of the hidden consortium base. Behind her, her team, a mix of humans and aliens, each chosen for their unique skills, checked weapons, and steeled themselves for what was to come. They burst from the stellar surface into a cavernous docking bay, alarms blaring as the consortium realized their sanctum had been breached. What followed was a running battle through twisting corridors and vast chambers filled with incomprehensible machinery. Arya led the charge, her body moving on pure instinct honed by years of combat and months of hellish survival. Casualties mounted on both sides as they fought deeper into the heart of the installation. Arya saw allies fall, their sacrifices driving her forward with grim determination. The consortium defenders grew more desperate, more fanatical, as the strike team approached the central chamber where the doomsday device waited. Finally, battered and bleeding but unbroken, Arya and the remnants of her team breached the last line of defense. The chamber beyond was a marvel of twisted science, a swirling vortex of energy contained within a framework of dark metal and pulsing crystals. At its heart, a figure waited, the true leader of the consortium, a being of shadow and malevolence. Arya Steele, the figure's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The indomitable human. We underestimated you, I think. A mistake we won't live to repeat." Arya raised her weapon, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It's over. Shut it down now, or we'll do it for you." The consortium leader laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "You still don't understand. This was always the endgame. Rebuild the galaxy in our image, or see it burn. There is no middle ground." With that, the figure lunged for the control panel. Arya's weapon barked, joined by those of her remaining teammates. The consortium leader fell, but not before initiating the weapon's final sequence. Klaxons blared as the vortex of energy began to expand, reality itself seeming to warp and twist around them. Arya raced to the control panel, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of the alien technology. She could feel the pull of the vortex growing stronger, threatening to tear the station, and soon, the entire galaxy, apart. In that moment, as oblivion loomed, Arya thought of everything that had led her to this point. The hellish heat of Tartarus Station, the loneliness of her exile on the crystal world, the bonds she had forged with beings from across the stars. She thought of Earth, of home, of all those counting on her to pull off one last miracle. With a silent prayer, Arya made her choice. She began to reroute the device's incredible energies, using the knowledge she had gleaned from the Luminian archives. The vortex pull intensified, threatening to rip her apart atom by atom. But she held on, her will unbreakable, her spirit unyielding. In a blinding flash of light and a soundless explosion that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality, it was over. The doomsday weapon imploded, taking the consortium's installation with it. But instead of destruction, it released a wave of energy that washed over the galaxy, undoing the damage the consortium had wrought and ushering in a new era of peace and understanding between species. In the aftermath, as the Alliance celebrated their victory and began the long process of rebuilding, Arya Steele became more than just a hero. She was a symbol of hope, of the indomitable human spirit that could overcome any obstacle, escape any prison, and save reality itself. The galaxy would face many challenges in the years to come, but it would face them united. And whenever beings looked up at the stars, they would remember the human who had done the impossible, who had brought light to the darkest corners of space, and who had shown that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope could never be truly extinguished. Arya Steele, the woman who had escaped the inescapable, had found her true purpose among the stars, and the legacy of her triumph would echo through the cosmos for eons to come.